Welcome to another episode of the ITAM Executive. I'm Kris Johnson here with my colleague Steve Hastings, and we wanted to talk about RFPs. This is a topic that we've spoken about amongst ourselves many times. Yeah. A lot of the frustrations that we see by both, those on both sides of the RFP. In our position, we of course are responding to a lot of RFPs for organizations that are interested in selecting a managed services provider for IT asset management services. Right. But we've also worked on the other side of things, helping our clients through RFP processes to select SAM tools, for example. There's a lot of frustration on both sides that we've observed and continue to live through, and we thought we could talk about some of those and see if any of these resonate with you, and see how we might, prevent some of these things, needless pain and frustration for everyone. So
yeah, there's really, as you think about an RFP process, or if you're procuring some of these high value services, there's the vendors that you're looking at. There's also the procurement departments that are facilitating the RFPs. Mm-hmm. And then there's also the business who is looking for value, right? Yeah. They're looking for something that can help them to derive some kind of business value for what they're doing, right? So trying to get all of that put together in a meaningful way so that you get the most out of it is not an easy process.
And oftentimes it's kind of obvious when you're the recipient of an RFP, when there's disconnect between the business and between the procurement folks that are running the mechanics and logistics of the RFP. This is manifested when the requirements are very superficial, haven't been thought out a whole lot, when there's not a lot of details about the environment, details about the volume of purchases, or how large a particular publisher is within their estate. And so, the Q&A process is designed to allow, would-be bidders or respondents to, ask questions, get those things answered. But time and time again, you ask certain questions like that and you get
don't get an answer,
superficial answers. Right. In part, I think just because of the mechanics of the RFP process, it's time bound. They're usually short fuses, which has its place for sure. Yeah. But, it often also represents, even on the part of the business, that maybe they haven't thought through exactly what they need. And they're kind of almost wanting the RFP process to kind of show them what they need.
Show them what they should do.
Which, again, is probably okay as long as they are willing to allow that to happen.
I think there's a misconception in the industry a little bit that if you give too much away about your environment or about your goals and objectives, that you'll somehow narrow the responses that you're going to get, or that you won't get the best broad response that you maybe want from the market, or potentially that you're thinking already, even at the beginning of the RFP, about your price negotiation, right? Mm-hmm. How is this going to affect if I give too much away? Yeah. Am I going to get overcharged? Am I going to get bids that are too high for my budget? Right? There's always those sort of considerations in the back of everyone's mind as you go through this process.
Yeah, good point. I'm thinking of an example, like take an Oracle managed service, which may be a component of a larger service. We very often, on the receiving end, don't get good information about how much are you spending with Oracle, what kind of agreement type are you in, where are you at in that life cycle, and what product mix do you use, right? And kind of some, our dominant product is this, so it's 80% or 60%, that is hugely necessary for anyone to put together a meaningful proposal, right? For a meaningful proposal requires the bidder to kind of know how much effort is going to need to be put into it. Yeah. Because if you just say, oh yeah, we spend X amount a year on Oracle, that helps, but without kind of at least breaking it down into product families, how much of that is database versus e-business suite versus middleware versus maybe you have JD Edwards, right? There are very few firms that can actually handle JD Edwards and know anything to do about it.
Right.
But if you have JD Edwards and you don't tell them, then you're at risk of selecting a provider that really has no clue how to provide value in the area that you might need it most. But if you're not willing to give that transparency, you don't know what you're asking for, one, and you have no idea what you're getting, and your bidders also don't know either, right?
Yeah.
And then it devolves into this what do you default to? Well, it's usually price, which certainly is important, has its place, but it can also illustrate that disconnect between, the procurement folks and the business folks because, price, we know how to negotiate price, says the procurement people.
Yeah.
When the bidders are like, well, we don't know what you actually need, so we're just going to float something out there. We might give a range if we can.
Yeah, we hope we get there. Right?
And then it gets to, well, how much can you discount? How much can you discount? When what we should be asking is, what do you actually really need?
Yeah.
And that hasn't been transparent. And so what you end up with is an outcome of an RFP process that is far away from what you actually needed it to lead you to.
Yeah. And for a provider like Anglepoint, that's extremely difficult for us. We are consultative sellers to our core, right? We want to understand your business needs. We're selling a high value solution that requires some customization, a lot of flexibility, right? Oftentimes our buyers they want us to be flexible with them. They want us to grow with them, right, in their journey. And that is really tough to do if you are sort of being kept out, if you feel like you're behind a wall. It's really difficult for us to help understand requirements and provide the solution that meets the needs of the customer.
Yeah, I'm very sympathetic to organizations that are doing an RFP process.
Oh, yeah.
Having been on the other side, helping them use an RFP process to select a tool, it's so hard to get to an apples to apples comparison, especially when you maybe don't know very well or haven't articulated or documented what your true requirements are and why. Because you're going to get, different flavors, right? And I think one of the trends we're seeing right now is RFPs being a bit more broad.
Yes. Maybe
by design, but maybe also because they haven't done the hard work of the requirements analysis. Yeah. In part, they want to kind of see, well, what does this provider recommend? And maybe you're trying to get some free consulting out of that, which, no shame in that. But at the end of the day, you kind of need to get to, if price is your biggest driver, you kind of need to get to an apples to apples comparison because just because you're getting a low cost here, but you're getting a higher cost here, but what they are providing and approaching and say that they're going to do is far and away better than what is over here that you may have asked for, but we run into this all the time, right? Yeah. The customer's asking for this, but we know that that's not going to give them what they actually are trying to achieve, right? So we try and say, well, if you really push us, here's what we think this would equate to. But what you really should be asking are these things over here. And this is what is going to mean success for you, right? But there's a risk for the bidder of doing that because then you're going to be compared, with somebody else that hasn't done that.
Yeah, and you may look more unfavorable than them, right?
Yeah, for when in actuality you're actually providing better value in the end for what they're actually.
And we see this a lot because you can tell when this is happening because the original RFP documents will come out. All the responses will go in, right? There will maybe be some Q&A sessions or some oral presentations, right? And then, weeks and sometimes months later, you'll get another call back from procurement or from the business, and they'll say, we're just having a hard time reconciling your solution. Can you give us more detail? Can you break down more of what you're right? And you can tell that they're trying to get to that apples to apples. They're having a really difficult time. If they would have front loaded some of those conversations earlier in the RFP process, they could have shrunk their time to solution, right? And been ready to procure a solution much, much faster, right? Which helps the business.
I think mature organizations recognize that the RFP process, because this isn't for a commodity good or service, right? If it's commodity good and service and everybody else is delivering the same thing, then price is your main driver. But in a scenario like this, where it's a managed service provider for a pretty high value service, where there is differentiation between the service being offered, mature organizations look at it as a way to identify who can we have trust in, right? Who instills confidence in us that they know what they're doing, but can make sure that it's a partner we can work with. Because if you're going through, let's say it's a 3-year managed service, your needs are going to evolve and change over that period. And you want a partner that's going to be flexible and provide best value for service as those needs evolve.
Yeah. And it used to be that there was not that much information out there about these services, right? Mm-hmm. It was very high level. It was very difficult to find the providers that were the most relevant. And now, especially in our industry, especially in the last, 3-4 years, there's been just a wealth of information that's been released about how to do IT asset management. What are the best practices? What are the standards and tools that are best, right? And so there's a lot of information out there, and procurement departments who recognize this are looking for providers to help them make sense of all this information, right? Can I take everything that's out there and distill it down into what I need? Mm-hmm. And is there a provider out there that can really help me to make sense of that in a meaningful way, right? And a smart and mature procurement department will look for that in providers, right? Yeah. Who can help me to take all the information that's on the buffet table and just pick and choose the things that are most important to me.
Yeah, I think a helpful analogy when you look at kind of other industries, if you look at legal services, nobody's doing a reverse Dutch auction to find the cheapest lawyer that they can. Right, your office of general counsel is going with who they know is recognized as experts in the field, right? Based off of their networks, who's providing best services, and then interviewing those people, getting confident with, you're going to be taken well care of, right? Yeah. Because we recognize that the cheapest lawyer out there is probably the cheapest lawyer for a reason.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Because nobody else is willing to pay for the service that they're rendering, which has a value that the market dictates. Yeah. I guess to procurement organizations, it might be good to recognize that this is not a commodity service in most regards, and that the more information and transparency you can provide, the more meaningful information you're going to get to be able to make the most informed decision.
We've been in a few RFPs involved in the last couple of months where it's been a very different process. There's a trend now in services procurement to be a lot more open, right? Mm-hmm. To be a lot more transparent, and instead of dictating to the market what they're looking for, they request from the market, what are the best practices? What solutions do you bring? And they're looking for a way to pick and choose kind of the best solutions for them, right? There's a little bit of a double-edged sword there, but they've opened up and been a lot more transparent in terms of what they know and what they don't know, what their business environment looks like, what their technical environment looks like. And it's a much more collaborative process, although, it does lengthen usually the time to solution.
And as long as they recognize that they're probably going to end up with some apples to oranges comparison.
Correct.
And as long as price is only one component that they're looking to evaluate on, and capabilities and fit and comfort level are going to be equally weighted.
And most providers out there are willing to talk about price, right? But not until the very end of the process, when we've all come to a solution that we feel comfortable with, right? We feel comfortable with each other. We feel comfortable that you're the provider that we like. And then most providers, once they Anglepoint is like this. Once we feel that we have a solution that will meet your needs, and that we've been able to develop that for you, we're happy to talk to you about value. Sure. We're happy to talk to you about price. We're happy to talk to you about ways to structure a deal so that it makes the most sense for you from a budget perspective or from a discount perspective, right? Those are conversations that we're always happy to have, but we want to have them in a transparent way.
Yeah. I feel like we're talking about price a lot for some reason, but it does figure prominently. One thing to recognize too, if you're looking to select a managed services provider or any professional service for that matter, you're largely going to get what you pay for. Yeah. If you squeeze that provider so so much on price. It forces you to, you're going to have to, go to a low-cost delivery center offshore, perhaps, which isn't necessarily a bad thing all the time, but oftentimes you're kind of diluting the expertise because it's rare that the world's experts on that particular issue or topic are going to be located in the lowest cost area of the world. It just doesn't work like that. Squeeze on cost, they're going to be forced to cut some corners inevitably somewhere. I remember we got brought in by a large healthcare company on the East Coast a number of years ago to do an assessment. We did a strategy development workshop of their SAM program, and they had an existing managed services provider, and they wanted some help on understanding how do they get more value out of that service.
Sure.
So we took a look at what was being provided, some of the strategic direction. We did a tooling review, all of those things, and one of the things that we recommended to them is you're not paying your managed services provider enough, right? As an independent third party, right? We're telling you, you're not paying our competition enough because they have the expertise in some of these areas, but you're not getting that expertise because you're not paying for it. They can't afford to give it to you. So it's something to recognize that you're going to get what you pay for to a large degree.
Yeah, they were forced, not just in terms of hours, but in terms of expertise, right? They were forced to probably leverage down, right, to less experienced resources. Maybe you don't get all the value.
It's like a balloon, right? You squeeze on one side, it's going to push out the other. You can't compress that air all at once.
Right. It has to give somewhere.
Yeah.
One other thing that I think is relevant when you talk about RFPs is the amount of time that it takes to complete the process, right, from start to finish. And as a managed services provider, we only see the back half of that process, right, from the time the RFP is released, right. But even before that, there's a significant amount of time and effort that's on the requester's side for gathering requirements and getting stakeholders aligned and getting budget approved. And there's a huge process that even comes before that. And so by the time the RFP is released and you start to interview providers and you start to do pricing negotiations and contract negotiations, by the time the end, that process can be significant. Like we were in an RFP, a large company out of Europe was looking for SAM managed services. And from start to finish, that process was over a year, right? And that's a year for companies like ours that provide value add services. That's a year of not having those services in place, right? And the value that you lose during that time by taking such a long process to pick a provider is a significant cost, right? And it's probably, in most cases, is a much larger cost than you might save by spending a long time negotiating between providers or trying to negotiate on price and save.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's obvious when the organization hasn't done their homework.
Right? Correct. Yeah.
And you see this all the time in orals presentations where there can also kind of be some contention or tension between different folks in the business that have a different agenda. They're not aligned on what they're actually needing. And so you get to questions like, well, are you going to do this? That was never mentioned in the RFP what you wanted. We can absolutely do that. We didn't know you wanted that. You didn't specify that, right? Yeah. And there's kind of this cross tension in the room because they haven't done the consensus building and alignment internally.
Yeah, that goes back to consultative transparency, right? Yeah. And we say in a lot of cases, you will have a much better and more productive RFP process if you would have just spent some time ahead of time, maybe some time and also some money in understanding your requirements, right? Understanding your use cases, maybe even doing some kind of a strategic roadmap or direction workshop with a provider like Anglepoint, right? To help front load some of those strategic questions so that when you do get to an RFP, you know exactly what you need, you know exactly what you're looking for. Yeah. And then when you see it in the marketplace, you know it, right? Yeah. You know, this is what I want. This sounds good. Let's find a good way forward with these guys. Yeah,
it's always frustrating. I know we've experienced this in the last year. You know, you go through a lengthy RFP process as the bidder. You go through the orals process, right? All the effort that takes. You get to down selection, and then even getting awarded as the provider. We're like, great. You know, let's start. You know, bring in all the people, and we're off to the races. And they're like, oh well. actually, we need to go make the business case to actually get the budget now. And it's like, wait a minute. What are we dealing with here?
Yeah. Nothing is more frustrating than that, right?
Like, I think it's just part of professionalism, right, in the world that we live in, that there be an element of transparency. Hey, we're going to need your help if selected to create the business case for this. That's a very important fact you probably want to be transparent about.
Yeah. And we want to help as a provider. I'm sure that all providers are like this. We want to help, right? We want to get you the best solution for you, right? We want you to provide value because we're interested in a long-term relationship, right? This is not a one and done for us. This is not a 2-month project where we're going to come in and then we're going to leave, right? We want to be in it for the long term, and the right amount of transparency and preparation up front can yield tremendous benefits down the road.
Yeah. So transparency, being real with each other, recognizing that you're sort of selecting a good fit, right? These are people that we're going to be working together for the next 3+ years. And so you want to make sure that you like them and that they're people that you can work with, that you're going to be flexible, because it is a partnership. It is a relationship. It's not a commodity service, and it shouldn't be treated like one.
That's a good point. I think you and I were in a presentation meeting with a large organization here in the US. And at the end of the presentation, the client asked us, if you were us, what would you be asking? What questions have we not asked, right? What should we be looking for that we haven't thought about? And I think you said, listen, you should find somebody that you like, right? You should find somebody you want to work with, that you think that culturally there's a good fit, and personality-wise there's a good fit, and people that you want to see every day, right? Because you're going to have calls, daily calls, weekly calls, monthly calls with these folks for the next 3, 4, 5 years, right? Like, pick somebody you like.
Life's too short to work with people that you don't like.
Yeah, exactly, right? So find somebody that you fit with, that you feel comfortable with, and that there's certainly in any service like that, there's going to be challenges. And so find somebody you can work together with to overcome those things. I think that's really important, that a lot of RFPs don't think about that, right?
Yeah. Well, I think this has been a good discussion. Hopefully some of these points have resonated with you. And, we have some things that we recommend that organizations looking to select a managed services provider ask your managed services providers as a way to get good information out of them that is going to be differentiated, so that you can make a good comparison. So hopefully that'll be of some help.
Definitely.
All right. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Kris.
You've been listening to the ITAM Executive, brought to you by Anglepoint. Make sure to hit subscribe in your favorite podcast player and give us a rating. Thanks for being part of the ITAM community. Until next time.